Hi, it's 1 o'clock. What's going on? I'm your host, Hugo Fernandez here. And today's show, my guests are Dima Bayrekdar of the Women's Center and LGBTQIA Safe Zone Hub, Dr. Charlene Bryant of the Criminal Justice Program, and recent graduate Alexa April Cardena, who are part of the Reclaiming Power podcast, a podcast storytelling series of encounters, relationships, and being, which will be launched on December 8th on LaGuardia Radio. And we'll be addressing issues of racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, classism, ableism, intersectionality, criminal justice reform, police brutality, and power dynamics in a conversational, student-driven format. That was a mouthful. And by the way, I started out the show with Power to the People, John Lennon. In 2 days, it'll be the 41st anniversary of his assassination, and who in his time was spoke out against a lot of things, particularly the Vietnam War and other things going on at the time. So I thought it was appropriate for this show. But welcome. And I was thinking this is a meta show because it's a radio show about a radio show. But I was telling you a little about before. Why don't you folks introduce yourselves and talk a little bit about your background, your studies, and before coming to LaGuardia. Dima, you actually have been on the show before, so why don't you go last because you're a veteran. Dr. Bryant or April, would either of you like to start?
Hey, Money, go ahead.
All right, I guess that's me. Well, thank you, Hugo, for having us. I think this is a fantastic outlet for, to talk about what's been going on and just, reach an audience that I've never, been a part of. The radio audience, I think, is so taken for granted. So thanks for, hosting this, having this, and then for hosting us today. So my name is April Cardena, Alexa, whatever you know me on campus, it's fine. I'll respond to all of them. So I recently graduated from LaGuardia in spring of 2020. I was was it spring? No, I'm lying to you. I completely lied to you. I graduated in fall of 2020, and I'm currently at NYU. So my involvement at LaGuardia was very sort of, I had 3 semesters there and I took full advantage of them. I met Professor Bryant through a class that everyone said was the hardest class you would take if you were a criminal justice major. So I went in being like, what's going to happen? And, thankfully I had her because she really changed the dynamic in the course of what I'm doing now and studying. So I was a criminal justice major at LaGuardia, involved, on every type of student leader position. I was chair of the student senate, peer leader. I worked in admissions after I graduated, and now I actually work at NYU. So I work in student affairs. I'm an academic advisor as well as a full-time student there. So, I was always interested in criminal justice reform, and being a child of immigrants, I think it's clear that Black and brown people, especially in a city like New York, they face a lot of inherently systemically biased institutions. There are a lot of just implementations that are just inherent to the way that we live and in our society that aren't talked about. And I think this past election, this presidential election, I think got a lot of people angry and active. And so we took that and we said, I think it's time. It's time to really talk about it. The good, the bad, and the ugly. So I will probably expand on that a little bit more, but that's just a little bit about me and why I wanted to really do this, and thanks to Professor Bryant for really taking me under her wing and helping me grow not only as an activist but also as just a person. So, and shout out to LaGuardia for letting me, for creating me into this person that I am. So yeah, that's sort of my tidbit.
Yeah, you almost did like the whole show in about a minute. Before we give Dr. Bryant a chance to introduce herself, what is it about her class that everybody thinks makes it so hard for them?
Her. And it's not a bad thing. So I have a distinct memory in which you select your classes and they're different sections, and so I don't remember offhand who the other professors were teaching that section, and the only one that fit my schedule with a professor named Charlene Bryant, who I had never met. And all I heard was like, she's tough, she's a tough professor. But you don't know what that means. I'm like, okay, well, I got to take it. So I walk into class, I'm sitting, I'm already nervous. It's my last semester. I have a certain GPA I want to keep. And she walks in. The second she walks in, all of my qualms went away. I'm like, wait, like this is who we're scared of? Like this is the person. She just starts talking and you already feel at home. You feel like this professor is not just a professor. Like I mean, with all of her credentials, with the intellect she has, with the quite literally the real world experience she has, you're like, wait, what's going on? Of course, after my first assignment, did I realize, oh, she's tough in the sense that she expects you to actually do all your work. But she created an expectation of academia that is not, it isn't always translated when you think of community college or junior college, right? And I think that's already I think there's a stigma there, but she provides you with a level of she challenges you and provides you with this level uh, of I guess intellect and expectations within academia and within this major that pushes you to really critically analyze what is happening, what has happened, and to then process that into, well, what am I going to do, right? And then if you are thinking about a 4-year career, or sorry, a 4-year college, pushes you into, well, let me look at other schools, let me look at other programs, police officers.
And you're at
Yes,
NYU,
I
right?
am, which is her
So
alma mater as well.
you reached. Well, let's get Dr. Brian in here. Dr. Brian, you want to introduce yourself, talk a little bit about your background and before coming to LaGuardia?
Well, my background is I'm from Brooklyn, so that should say a lot. So I was born and raised in Brooklyn, so that's it. The end of the show, right?
Right.
I as April mentioned, I went to NYU undergrad. I was born and raised in East New York, Brooklyn, across the street from Lewis Pink Projects, down the block from Cypress Hills Projects. So I know all about it. I know from the rooter to the tutor, as they say, from the beginning to the end. So I have a very good understanding of what it looks like to be discriminated against, to be oppressed in this country. And as I moved through NYU, I graduated from there with an English degree. And then I went on to Georgetown University Law Center. I got my law degree from there. And I went into the DA's office, Kings County District Attorney's office, for a little while. And so I have a very well-rounded understanding of racism, discrimination. So before LaGuardia, I did a lot of things. During my undergrad, I studied at the University of London for a little while. And then after I got out, did the Kings County thing. I worked in the music industry for quite some time. I worked in the urban fashion. So at this point, it's kind of dated, like Mecca and Nietzsche, those types of fashion lines. I worked with those guys. And then I went into corporate, which was a disaster, but I did corporate for a little while. And then I went back into Manhattan DA's office. I worked there for a little while in a different capacity as an alternative counselor for alternative incarceration, to try to come up with different, rather than put people in jail, let's figure out a way to keep them out of jail and address the root of the problem and fix it. And of course, that was very political, and that didn't work out too well. But prior to that, I worked at John Jay. I think my first teaching experience was actually in law school. And from then on, I was in love. I started teaching, doing whatever I could get my hands on. But my first professional teaching responsibility was at Queens College. I taught at Queens College for a little while. I taught at Lehman. I taught at John Jay. And then I left, and then I came back. Actually, Ilyasa Shabazz, whose sister just passed away recently, she and I are friendly, and she's the one that brought me back to teaching. And so I went back to John Jay, and then I wound up at LaGuardia. I mean, it's just, I wound up at LaGuardia, and I love it at LaGuardia. It's just in terms of the diversity, and and the student body reminds me very much of who I was at that age. The hustle. Everybody's trying to hustle their way through LaGuardia, so I can meet them where they are. So, but LaGuardia is a good place. And I mean, April says I'm hard. It's just that I understand what it's like out in this world. I understand what systemic looks like, smells like, feels like. And so I wouldn't want anybody to have to go through some of the things that I had to experience as a young person. And so I push them. I push them to be critical, to make critical thinking a part of their everyday life. I push them to not be powerless because they've been socialized in this country to be powerless. DEMA has given me the opportunity to lend voice, to help students, young people find their voices, because a lot of them don't feel like they have a voice. A lot of them don't feel like they can push back or say anything. So this, LaGuardia and the project that DEMA came up with gave me an opportunity to have some of the brightest minds. I mean, April and Danny and Jermaine and Rachel are some of the best students that have come out of LaGuardia. And I have such high expectations for them. I'm so proud of them. Like I gave birth. So I am so proud of them. And so to be able to help people move through what's been presented, the lack of opportunity that's been presented to them, to be able to get them through that. Now, April's at NYU. She's at my alma. I mean, at John Jay, I had a young woman who, Sophie Costas, and she was actually one of the guests at the Criminal Justice Club. Sophie, I got her to do an internship at the district attorney's office. She went on to Georgetown Law School. She's practicing law in Miami, and now I'm about to be a granny. So at the end of the day, my ability to get these young people to places where they are powerful, where they are proud, where they have voices, is just, I'm good with that. That's all I need. I can just drop dead. I'm good.
Good. I want to talk a lot about that, but I want to give DEMA a chance to say something. And you have been on our show before. You've been our guest before. So anything you want to add about anything to say? Just hi.
Hi. Yeah, no, thank you so much for having us on the show. Yeah, I guess just a little bit of background. I mean, I have a background in teaching in DC and Chicago and in New York. I think through teaching, I learned, meeting students where they are. Actually just kind of like the power of listening, right? And just not going into situations with assumptions, and the power of story, actually, which, is very much connected to what we're doing here. And I also just through teaching, I became very much interested in human behavior, human dynamics. How do we engage with ourselves? How do we engage in the world? Self-perception, how do we, the lessons that we receive through the education system, through different systems, how does that inform self-perception? So that kind of led me to study mental health counseling. And specifically, I became interested in trauma-informed treatment and kind of an interest in working with refugees and political asylees. And I'm on that road, very long road towards licensure. So I'm currently doing that. And I'm also with the Women's Center and LGBTQIA Safe Zone Hub. And I feel like all the work is interconnected in just really, again, meeting people where they are, listening, connecting them to resources, really bringing to the forefront, like, your voice matters, your story matters, it needs to be heard, and really that no one else can get inside of your experience, right? So in the rarity of the rarity of in this case, students, like, just like acknowledging that and really that they are valuable and their stories matter. And, how can we work collectively? Like, this process has been, I've been working with amazing folks like Professor Bryant and others. I know we'll get into it, but, what a collaboration. Like, it was just this cross-divisional meeting of folks who really had a similar interest, and that we can build something together, and so yeah, it's an honor. It's an honor to be here.
I mean, I guess we are talking about that, so I guess we can talk about the genesis of the work you were doing. So how did this whole project begin?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, there's so many, to say that 2020 was tough is an understatement, right? But here we are. We were in a time of isolation, of uncertainty, of COVID, racial unrest, the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and so many others, and this moment of lockdown with injustices happening before our eyes, isolation, and how unity occurred, and it what was coming up, so much was coming up, but one thing that at that time, especially being kind of through remote learning, it's like, okay, what are the students experiencing during all of this? What is their experience? What kind of messages are being expressed about Black lives, about the value on Black life, and really, how are they, and how is it landing, and what is their experience, and how important to have space for that expression, right? So that's really where it started. And at the time, I was doing support circles for students to kind of talk about things that were coming up for them. But it just, in talking to other faculty and staff, we're like, yeah, let's make some sort of, we really started to talk about it, I want to say October, November, December of 2020. And we brainstormed, we knew we wanted it to be student. We talked about, okay, maybe an art, maybe it's multimedia expression, or maybe, and somehow it's like, well, what about a podcast series? And we knew that we wanted it to be about, it could be macro or micro, but experiences connected to racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, classism, police brutality, anything that touches on power dynamics, and anything where it's like, where power perhaps has been taken away, and that reclaiming, and the idea of reclaiming power just happened naturally, like the power of the voice, and that reclaiming power can look like so many different things. And I think too, like, what is the narrative that's being presented out there? Whose narrative? What is missing, right? Again, and so we came up with this proposal form for students to share their stories about the encounters, the relationships, things that have impacted them on a personal level, that has impacted their identity, their being, about any of these kind of forms of discrimination that we listed earlier, and to give voice to that. Where are you with that? Where are we now? Where would you like to go? And we got like 10 proposals. 10, or like, students were really responding, and I really want to again just give it up to the students who are launching our series: Rachel Moreno, Daniel Tolero, April Cardena, who's with us today, Alexa, and Jermaine Hall, for really kind of launching this and bringing the idea to fruition. And again, it's all about the students and their voices and making sure that they get heard.
Okay, so how did Dr. Bryan and April get involved with this project? Because I guess I don't know where these conversations were happening. I didn't participate in any of them, which is actually amazing, because people always accuse me of being at every single meeting at LaGuardia. So it's kind of exciting that this one meeting I wasn't at. So how do April and Dr. Bryan get involved?
Dr. Bryan, April, jump in at any point here.
Maybe you could talk.
Well,
let them talk.
Essentially, I was sitting in one of our meetings, and when they talked about, when we came up with this idea, we kind of molded around a lot about the podcast. And immediately, I've had all four of them have been in, like, I think April was in one class, Jermaine maybe have taken 2 classes, Danny maybe 2 or 3 classes, Rachel 2 classes. So immediately I thought of some of the best students that I've known in LaGuardia to represent their generation. And I really do, with all my heart, believe that they are leaders and they will lead. And I thought the best way to kick off this show to lend voice is to have some of the leaders with voices. And I immediately got, and April will tell you, I have them on, I have a thread with all four of them on it. And I immediately reached out to all of them. I'm like, look, you guys want to do a podcast? And they jumped all over it. They jumped all over it. So that's how that came to be.
Yeah,
And
it was so
April?
the Criminal Justice Club is a club on LaGuardia. I mean, a lot of criminal justice students, it's just something that you know about, and if you're a criminal justice major, you're like inherently a part of. But some people come and visit and whatnot. And so in this club that Professor Bryant has continued to just develop, and it continued to happen even in the height of COVID, and right in when lockdown happened, we were still Zooming and whatnot. And we had these conversations. We were having really intense discussions, conversations, really painful topics that we were talking about when all of these things were happening, and it seemed like these students who were not only studying criminal justice or sociology or whatever it was, had a space, because we had created the space, the students along, under Professor Bryant's sort of, mentorship, we had created the space that we could talk about anything from criminal justice reform to police brutality in an academic, yet personal way. If that may, it was sort of like an applied studied kind of thing. Like you could talk about your personal experience, right? Because there were some students who would say, yeah, I have family in the, that have been incarcerated. I have people right now that are incarcerated, and this is their, so it was this beautiful sort of dichotomy of personal experience, and then how does this apply to what you're studying? And so that was the club. So we had already sort of started these conversations way back when. And when Professor Bryant said, this is a podcast where you can, share these stories, but also talk about what can we do to prevent or to work towards and progress towards, equity and understanding of intersectionality, and how that is, an inherent part of everything that we do today. And so, I mean, yeah, of course, the four of us, if you've ever met us, we're not shy. We're not quiet people, especially when these kind of topics come up. And in our own ways, we have, really taken our own experiences and created a sense of, this is how I'm going to fight the system. And I put them in quotes because some of us are infiltrating the system to change the system. And so we all immediately all said, this is something we need to do, not even we want to, but we need to do for the sake of, of progress. So yeah, I think that's that. And I think if Jermaine and Rachel and Danny were here, they would agree with those sentiments.
And so the piece where, and one of the things I'm realizing is, if I'd been thinking of it, it would have been great to have played even a segment of one of the podcasts. But I guess you were thinking of podcasts. So when does the radio station get involved? How did that happen?
So I'll just jump in there. So we start when I put the call out to the college community about, hey, here's a project, who's interested in working on this. That's when we were probably a group of about 22 people, faculty and staff who were interested in working on it. And part of it, so Jamie Riccio from the radio station joined us, and Chris. And, I can't name all 22 people right now, but in the end, we became a committee, Kyle Holler-Gregory is part of the group, Jamie, Chris, Esther Rosa, Nathan Tosh. But really, Jamie and Chris have been so supportive in getting the content to the production level.
So it was basically just, they stepped up.
Yeah.
and said, let's we're here to help you technically.
Well, yeah, but I mean, they were part of the team. Like, once we got all the proposals, it was a team effort to kind of select which one is the launching episode, and they really followed up with the students and gave them production support and guidance, and just it's really been a team effort.
And where are these things going to live?
So
Like,
there's
yeah.
on the SoundCloud page, the radio station SoundCloud.
Oh, so this is going to be directly linked to our SoundCloud. And how are students going to find out about it?
So we actually we have a flyer now, and a link to the SoundCloud. So we'll be promoting this like shortly after this segment.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm
really?
going to use it in my classroom
How?
instruction.
Oh, sorry. How so? How are you going to use it?
Essentially, I mean, a lot of the students, again, a lot of them, when you talk to them, when you really get them to talk to you, they feel this really sad sense of powerlessness. And so I think while I'm teaching policing, I'm also trying to empower them, and if they now have this ability to hear students, I mean, because there is some discussion about policing and, they talk about everything in this podcast. So I can easily just take a clip and then, have the students, with respect to the discussion board, what do you think about this? Add the clip and then get them to respond and let them know these are former LaGuardia students. You could be that way too.
Okay. You could be on a podcast. It's 1:29. I want to just do a quick station break. You're watching and listening to What's Going On. I'm your host, Hugo Fernandez, here on LaGuardia Web Radio, WLGR. And today's show, my guests are Dima Bayraktar of the Women's Center and LGBTQIA Safe Zone Hub, Dr. Charlene Bryant of the Criminal Justice Program, and a recent LaGuardia graduate, Alexa Cardena, and they are part of the Reclaiming Power podcast, a podcast storytelling series of encounters, relationships, and this launches on December 8th here on LaGuardia Web Radio. And the new podcast series address issues such as racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, classism, ableism, intersectionality, criminal justice reform, police brutality, and power dynamics in a conversational, student-driven format. And I don't think I could have picked a better, background than the siren going by. As New Yorkers, we all know that's the soundtrack of our lives. But I want to talk. Let's talk about some of these individual podcasts, and I guess we should probably start with April's, since she's here to talk about it. So, April, tell me a little bit about the podcast that you created for the series.
So, because the four of us, Danny, Jermaine, Rachel, and I, we have, our collective sort of what brings us together is criminal justice, and obviously Professor Bryant, right? So we, some of us want to go and are currently on the law track. Some of us are more on the, social services track. But regardless, that brought us together, and so. As I had previously mentioned, we had all met. We had never taken classes together. I don't think we were even the same year graduates. So we collectively met through the Criminal Justice Club that under Professor Bryant and Professor Gregory. So we had talked to each other about these different incidents of police brutality, both recent as 2020, but also going back to the 1980s. And so we had all just grown very comfortable with each other in things that we agreed and disagreed. But at the end, it all culminated into this understanding that this was a space in which we could help each other navigate our feelings, our emotions, but also policy, and also what can we do next. And so these conversations were already happening, and so once we got that group text from Professor Bryant saying, guys, this is happening, like, what do you think? It was never like, oh, you should do this. It was like, what do you think about this? Immediately, I think within the minute, we had all said we're in, like, we want in, we want to do this, because it was now a platform in which we all understood that it would reach another audience, but also it was the way it was structured. And I think Dima had mentioned this, the way it was structured was not only talking about things, but also reclaiming the inherent power that was lost by those individuals in those communities, and talking about how do we get that back? How do we now either what can we as students, what can we as people going into, these professions, and what can we as just inherent individuals do for those communities or for these movements that are starting? Like, what can we do, and how can we, elevate others to do the same? And so that's really, if you do listen, which I hope everyone listening now listens to the podcast does, that's really what we talk about. We talk about, yeah.
Oh, so you're not making an individual podcast on a subject. You are basically recording conversations between the five of you on a
Exactly.
particular subject
It's
for each.
inherently conversational.
So
Yes.
so what's the first subject? What's going to be the first podcast? You hinted that you had some sort of flagship podcast that was going to come out, or do they all become available at the same time and people just pick? I'll listen to something about ableism, or I'll listen.
No. Sorry, I didn't mean. No, it's so it's a podcast series, and this is the first episode. And this one, I would say, focuses on kind of the peak of lockdown, Black Lives Matter movement. Looking at the deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, where do we go from here? The next episode, we're kind of in conversation with, the next student and students who will do the second episode, which there will be more of a focus on homophobia. So as the episodes are produced, maybe we do, we're still in communication about it, but maybe it's for a year, for example. But once that next episode's produced, it will be posted to the SoundCloud.
And do you pull these topics like out of a hat?
It's student driven.
It's student how do we determine? Right? So they determine what each subject is going to be
on
a week by week basis.
So we had a proposal.
Or podcast to podcast.
We put out the proposal. This is the theme, right? This is a podcast series focusing on encounters, relationships, moments of power being taken away, how you can reclaim it, through conversation, all driven by students. And they also, like we got like maybe 12 submissions of different ideas for episodes. Mm-hmm. And so this is the starting point. They're starting us off, and we'll see. We have other ones in the pipeline, and the committee will come back together and reach out to students in developing the next episode.
So, Dr. Bryant, is that your role in this ongoing process? Are you part of that committee that determines what the next podcast will be, that kind of thing?
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, I've been in touch with one of our former students, Carolyn Marin, and Carolyn graduated. I think actually Carolyn graduated maybe 2018, maybe, and she just completed John Jay, and we've been in contact, over the last 4 years. And she's constantly talking to me about COVID and the COVID vaccine and why should I take it and this and this and this. And I said, you know what? Do you want to do a podcast and maybe you sit with a doctor and you ask the doctor the questions? I'm not. And I think right. The interesting part of that proposal, and we'll have to flesh it out some more, the committee. But I think it's like where a student now has the ability, or a former student or a young person now has the ability to ask a doctor questions about why should they take the vaccine. And then I have some other students who are current students who are interested in talking more about police brutality. So, I mean, I'm a part of the committee that sits and fleshes out a lot of these, but I'm also, too, one of the, the members of the committee that goes out and finds these students who are interested in expressing and talking. Sure.
In the business, we would call that
the
producer.
Production.
She wears many hats.
You find the talent.
Said she wears many hats, definitely.
What was it?
Production.
She wears many, as well as being a tough teacher. It is kind of interesting because when you talk about how these things come together, I don't know if you pay any attention to my shows. Last year, around the time of the transition of power, I had a guest on. I think a little bit before that, during the whole election, I had a couple of people on, and one of them is an old friend from Berlin who was trying to make the case that some of the things they were doing around the COVID situation were attempts to actually, squash dissent because obviously you cannot take to the streets and protest the way Black Lives Matter was doing, let's say, before the most recent presidential election, if everybody's got to stay 6 feet apart. And, everybody. So it would be, but it's interesting how, so here we have a student who is concerned about the vaccine.
Yeah.
And
she hasn't taken it yet. She hasn't taken it. She refuses to take it because she feels like there's some there's this ulterior motive attached to it. And I can't blame her. Look, it's America. I can't blame her.
Well, I mean, I did shows about, and we talked about this. I mean, I don't know what background your student is, but there's certainly enough history in the United States about how, medical malpractice towards people of color, let's say. I mean, every group, really, if we start digging, right. So you can appreciate why people would have concerns about the medical community now, given that kind of history. So what you're saying, the first, what are the how many have we got in the can right now as far as podcasts? You said about 5 in the can.
Right now we have 1 completed, which which is
and that particular one. What's the topic, April?
So we talk about really it's what happened in 2020. Black Lives Matter. We're talking about social movement. We're talking about during COVID, how did we navigate this? And then, we really conclude with the question is, well, what do we do now? What can we do now? What can you as students, we address the students and say, this is what you can do. So that's really the format, is introducing the topic of the loss of power, and just what this is meant to be. And then we go into social and racial injustice, and what that looks like in different aspects, systemic oppression, both in the sense of societal, but also institutionally, academically. What does that look like? And move towards a call to action, not only for ourselves but for the students. And then we really just close off engaging and say, we hope you enjoyed this. We hope you listen again, and remember to not forget to reclaim your power and reclaim your identity and reclaim your voice, which is what really this is all about. So whether we're talking about every sort of ism that you mentioned, right, we're talking about one specific one here, which is racism, which is all encompassing, really, and intersectional if we talk about ableism and homophobia and sexism, et cetera. But that's what we really hone in on here. And, moving forward, we'll tackle other subjects as we see fit and as we see make sense. And obviously, if there are incidents that happen, we'll bring those and we'll tie those in as well to sort of bring context to maybe those who aren't as privy to the historical aspect of it, so that they have like this is happening today and it's happening like in our face, and we need to do something about it kind of story.
How long are these podcasts? What are we talking about?
They're about,
time-wise?
Each episode is about 45 to 50 minutes.
And how do you determine that? Is it just you see how much steam you've got, or is there a script here? Do you have some character like me who, I'm going to keep you on time. Come 2 o'clock, we're pulling the plug, right? So how is that time determined? Is that about as much time as we think anybody will listen to?
Yeah,
or
what do we wanted to make it digestible. Like if you think about kind of a typical podcast episode, it can be anywhere from 45 to 60 minutes. So that's where that decision came from. I think also it's a process. So like we have another student that we're working with, who her piece is a conversational piece focusing on homophobia and queer identity. And she submitted a proposal and we want to meet with her because we have some kind of follow-up questions. Like we really want to work with her and kind of just figuring out kind of like, okay, what's the primary theme? What's the angle? So we want to support and guide students through the process. And, in the end, it's their voice that makes up the episode and their story, their narrative. But we want to support them as much as we can.
And is this thing basically like recorded and unedited, or is there some sort of production to it where, I mean, I think of different kinds of podcasts where music comes in, or they clip between, 1 minute we're listening to somebody talking in a room, the next minute, they're walking to class or whatever it is, April Cardenas, undergrad at NYU was walking through, through whatever it is, George Washington Square Park on her way to anthropology class, blah, 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 whatever it is. So is this just like, you turn it on, 45 minutes later, you turn it off, what's in the can is in the can.
This is really where our friends Jamie Riccio and Chris Pope were instrumental, right? So the raw file was shared with them, and then Professor Holler Gregory and I, we met and we did like the introduction, like we did an intro, and it was paired with music, and then it goes into the piece by the students, and then an outro also with music. And in a lot of ways, like, we've never done anything like this before. This was the pilot project. And I think, they've created like a real strong template for kind of how the other episodes are going to roll out. But I think it was important to us and the committee to just like, have a structure between, 45 to 50 minutes intro, and the intro is just about what the Reclaiming podcast series is about, the piece, and then the outro.
I think it was necessary for it to be really organic. And I think this first episode, the 4 people that came together to do this were like absolute rock stars. And they set a high bar. And, I think if you speak to Jamie about it, there was very little editing that had to be done on that episode because it was so good. So I think, the goal is not to have anything scripted or, too much structure, but to give students the opportunity to express themselves, like, as we say around the way, real talk. Just keep it on.
I agree with both Dima and Professor Brian. There's an inherent structure of how, each episode will be, right? You have an intro, then you have the student piece, and then you have an outro. But the actual conversation, the actual content is so off the cuff, unscripted, but it also speaks volumes about the other speakers that and the other former students that I was engaging with. It was just such a powerful conversation, and it was so informed, right? And it was just so well done and I'm giving kudos to all of them, because we each bring a different perspective. We even joke about it because we can be so candid about these conversations. Some are very far left and progressive between the 4 of us, and some of us are more in the moderate section, and you can hear that, but you can also hear the intellect that these people bring and their actual informed content. And so I think we recorded for the actual recording, our actual Zoom meeting, I think was about 2.5 hours. It wasn't all recorded. We forgot to record at one point and restarted. So it was a very sort of organic conversation, but it was comfortable. And I think that's also what we hope the listener has, right? Sometimes you hear something and you're like, oh, that's really cringy, and you don't want to continue, or you see something and you're like, that makes me uncomfortable, right? It's that we in retrospect, I don't think we give that. We tackle really hard issues and really sort of painful, content, but we do it in a manner that's respectful and that students of all ages and people of all backgrounds can relate, or so we hope so.
We're in the last quarter hour of the show, and at this point we typically take time for questions. And let me see, so most of there's a remark here from Kayak 8001 saying, want to become, oh no, forget it, that's some ad they stick on the show. A loyal fan. So there are no questions, so we can at this point actually talk about the future. And I know that, granted, we're at the beginning of this and it's just begun, but do we see this? I mean, already Dr. Bryan talked about that she wants to incorporate it into her class as something for students to listen to and then respond to. Which, by the way, 45 minutes of listening, and then it'll be interesting to see how that works. But I know obviously students
Now, you
listen
stick
to
it on
longer
a
things.
discussion. You stick it on a discussion board, Hugo.
Yeah,
You stick it on a discussion
I
board.
get
You
it.
ask a question, and then you let them tell them go in the bathroom or listen on the train or wherever they listen. Because again, it's about committing to yourself. So commit to yourself. So if you don't listen, you're not committed to yourself. You don't want to grow. You don't want to change.
But they have to be ready to change, right?
You're exactly right. But you know what? You propose to them
Right.
that there's a need to change. Because you can't change, you can't grow, you can't do anything until you change and you grow, you be more accepting, you be more open. When you stay the same and don't open yourself up to different experiences and different things, then you lose.
Yeah, and
Like,
look, you know that,
look,
I know
that.
but when a student is ready to hear that, because I say that kind of stuff in class every day, but whether anybody's listening, the little black boxes that are muted is a whole nother issue. But I guess my question is, do we see this fitting into a larger piece, either with the center or anything else? Have you thought, or are we just kind of, we're in this now?
Yeah. I mean, I see it as, listen, the last 20 months, I'd be very curious to ask students, like, listen, let's talk about your educational journey. And this is actually very connected to what another project that I'm working on with Tuli Chatterjee and the LaGuardia Humanitarian Initiative, just to get students to talk about their educational journeys. How did they get here? What are the obstacles that they've experienced? How did they navigate? I see that really tying into reclaiming power. And if you look at the last 20 months, being, whether it was restricted to a screen or a black box or just being on mute, like what's that been like for you? What's it like to come back to campus now? What's it like, engaging with your peers? Like being like, where are you as a learner today? How have you changed? And what kind of learner do you want to be? What's the change that you want to be as a learner and a student moving forward? We can't overlook or put the blinders on of how this time has impacted, how we engage socially, emotionally, how we engage as learners. I think there's a lot more to explore here. So I think that we just have to, I'm committed as someone from the center, committed to continuing to reach out to students, to encourage them to tell their stories. And otherwise, we have to break the silence, right? And students are, I think, eager to share their stories, and we just have to give them, support them and help them with finding the platform.
Okay. And our final outcome is, in the end, do we have one?
I think the committee has talked, if we could do 4 episodes a year, 5 episodes a year, like that's, maybe 2 a semester, something like that. That's a benchmark that we've talked about. What do you think, Charlene?
Yeah, well, that's easy. That's done. I got shows back. I can get shows. I can do that. So we can. There it is.
Take them out of your cuff.
We could do that. It's just about really, in terms of being teachers or professors, it's not just about content, but it's also about helping our young people grow. And through these exercises, we give them the opportunity to grow and hear their own voices and be expressive and hear how they sound and and see the power of the things that they're expressing. So, I'm very proud of this, and I would love to see this continue. These are very interesting topics that DEMA has come up with They're very important. They're very interesting. And so as long as we have an opportunity or a vehicle for them to express themselves, then I think it can continue as long as the group is together. I mean, like Dima said, it started off with 22. I think it's like 5 of us.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't see why we can't continue to do it. I mean, as long as we have, great people coming back, like, April coming back and encouraging, and we can do it. It can be done. It could be like, what's up? What's going on right now? It could be one of those kinds of situations. But yeah, like your show.
You mean like my show?
But student driven, because it's so important for them to understand
Yes.
and exercise their voices.
We're almost out of time, so I wanted to give the three of you any last words or any last thank yous you'd like to make or anything. Who'd like to go first?
I want to thank April. I want to thank Jermaine Hall. I want to thank Danny Tillero. I want to thank Rachel Moreno. And those are names that you guys will hear about. Those are people I always kid around in my class. When April was in the class, it used to turn into mayor, governor. Like every week she was going to be something different. So I want to thank her, those guys, for putting in the time. They're alum now, but they made time to do this. And they're busy. Like Danny's now at the CCRB, Jermaine's in grad school, April's working. For them to take time to do this, I greatly appreciate it. And I also want to thank Dima for coming up with this. I thank Dima all the time. This is her brainchild. This is her baby. She came up with this, and we helped her make it come to fruition. So I want to thank you both for the opportunity. And thank you too, Hugo. You're an okay kind of guy.
You're welcome. April, Dima, any last words?
Go ahead, April.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we could go full circle and just thank everyone and, get those things back. But definitely, I mean, for one, I want to thank, LaGuardia as an institution for really cultivating me as a student and, as a post-traditional student that I am. I was given such incredible resources and opportunities and professors to dive in and to be confident enough to talk about these issues. I met an incredible mentor who I've already promised if if we're in person, will come to my graduation. That's how much of an impact she has had on my life. And then thankful for this platform, and for these virtual platforms that we have. In the height of COVID, we were able to have these outlets that we couldn't have done in person. And it was a lot of pain, a lot of anger, a lot of frustration, a lot of confusion, and there still is today. And so having these outlets, and Dima, for you really providing a platform for students to talk to students and address students, is so critical, especially when you are in an environment, an urban environment such as New York, where this happens every day. So there's so much to be grateful for, and for Jamie to really take time to say this is a real project and we're going to treat it as such. Is incredible. So, just thankful for all of that. And also, to the students that hopefully listen, and really say, oh, that could be me. Because we're no longer there. We're no longer at LaGuardia, but doesn't mean that we're, far removed. So to the students, I want to encourage to really listen, and to really sort of, start speaking, start asking questions. And it's okay if you're wrong. It's okay if you don't know a topic. That's what this is for, is to really begin a conversation and continue it until there's legitimate change. And Hugo, for having us today. So thank you. Thank you all. And good night.
You're welcome.
Something
Dima,
quick.
something quick.
Again, Rachel, Daniel, April, Jermaine, you're awesome. Thank you so much. I really just want to I really just wanted to bring people together. So again, I want to thank the committee, Professor Holler Gregory, of course, Charlene Bryant, who's like amazing support, Jamie Riccio and Chris Pope, Esther Rosa, Nathan Tosh. I just, we've had so much fun as well while we've been doing this. So it really just came from a place, let's come together, let's build, let's listen, and let's, make sure with the common interest in our students and the students and making and valuing their voices. And here we are. So it's really been quite beautiful to see the evolution of the project and to see that here we are right now. And hopefully more students will tune in and feel inspired and get involved, and we'll continue. And thank you, Hugo, for having us on.
You got it. I want to thank the three of you for being on our show today. And thanks, folks, for watching. The show is What's Going On. I'm your host, Hugo Fernandez, here on LaGuardia Web Radio. Today's show, my guests have been Dima Bayraktar of the Women's Center and LGBTQIA Safe Zone Hub, Dr. Charlene Bryant of the Criminal Justice Program, and recent LaGuardia graduate Alexa Cardena, or April, who have been a part of Reclaiming Power Podcasts, a podcast storytelling series of encounters, relationships, and being that's going to be launched on December 8th, which happens to be the anniversary of John Lennon's assassination. On LaGuardia Web Radio, this new podcast series addresses racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, classism, ableism, intersectionality, criminal justice reform, police brutality, power dynamics, and it's in a conversational, student-driven format. So I hope you will listen. I will certainly listen. I think faculty, we need to listen as much as anybody else, and staff and everybody here at LaGuardia. So again, thanks for watching, for listening, and Mr. Pope, please take us out as we began the show today. Bye-bye.